Hello, and welcome to a quiz all about the greatest of all giant killers, David and Goliath. 20 questions. Let's begin. Question 1. Where did Saul and the Israelites camp when they faced Goliath and the Philistines? Was it the valley of Eshcol, the valley of Rephaim, the valley of Elah, or the valley of Achor? And that was the valley of Elah in 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 2. In some versions, it's called the Turpentine Valley, the valley of the terebinth trees, or the valley of oaks. Question 2. Approximately how tall was Goliath in feet? Was he 6 feet, 8 feet, 10 feet, or 12 feet? Goliath was 10 feet tall, according to 1 Samuel 17, verse 4. 6 cubits and a span. 1 cubit is 18 inches, and a span 9 inches. So making Goliath 9 feet, 9 inches tall. Question 3. What was the helmet that Goliath wore made from? Was it made from iron, wood, silver, or bronze? That was made from bronze, according to 1 Samuel 17, verse 5. Question 4. How heavy was Goliath's coat of armor? Was it 1,000 shekels, 2,000 shekels, 5,000 shekels, or 10,000 shekels, which would be 250 pounds? And the answer is 5,000 shekels, which would be about 125 pounds. Wow. Question 5. How heavy was the tip of Goliath's spear? Was that 200 shekels, 600 shekels, 1,000 shekels, or 2,000 shekels? And that was 600 shekels, about 15 pounds. Question 6. Who walked ahead of Goliath? Was it the captain of the army, a small boy, his son, or the shield bearer? And that was the shield bearer. You'll find that in verse 7, chapter 17. Question 7. For how many days did Goliath issue his challenge to the Israelites? Was it 10, 20, 30, or 40? And that was 40, which is another occasion when the number 40 appears in Scripture, signifying a time of trial or testing. Question 8. What did Jesse send with David to the army camp? Was it fresh horses, provisions of food, lambs for sacrifice, or news from back home? And that was provisions of food, specifically grain, loaves, and cheese, in verses 17 to 18. Question 9. Which of David's elder brothers rebuked him for coming down to the battlefront? Was that Abinadab, Shammah, Nathanael, or Eliab? And that was Eliab. Question 10. What animals that David protected his flocks from did he consider as the experience needed to fight Goliath? Was it lions and bears, foxes and bears, lions and foxes, or wolves and lions? And he protected the flocks from lions and bears. Question 11. How many smooth stones did David take from the brook? Was it 1, 2, 5, or 7? And that was 5. I suppose they had to be smooth to give reliable exit from the sling. Question 12. Other than his shepherd's pouch, sling and stones, what else did David take with him to face Goliath? Was it a sword, shepherd's staff, bow and arrows, or a spear? And that was his shepherd's staff, according to 1 Samuel 17, verse 40. Question 13. To what animal does Goliath liken himself, which David is coming after with sticks? Is it a pig, a rat, a dog, or an ox? And he said he was like a dog. In verse 43. Question 14. Who did Goliath say he would give David's flesh to? Was it the fires of Gehenna, the wild dogs, the gods of the Philistines, or the birds and the beasts? And Goliath thought he would give David to the birds and the beasts. Question 15. Where did David strike Goliath with a stone from his sling? Was it his forehead, his ear, his chest, or the back of the head? And he hit him on the forehead. Question 16. What weapon does the Bible say David did not need to kill Goliath? Was it a bow and arrow, a spear, a sword, or a dagger? And that was the sword, according to 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 50. Question 17. What did David do with Goliath's sword after pulling it out of its sheath? Did he give it to Saul, drive it through Goliath's heart, cut off Goliath's head, or hold it aloft in victory? David cut off Goliath's head, demonstrating that the Philistines' champion was dead. Question 18. What did the Philistines do when they realized that Goliath was dead? Did they flee, surrender, freeze, or rush into battle? And they fled. Question 19. Where did David place Goliath's armor after the battle? Was it under an oak tree, in his tent, in the temple, or in Saul's palace? You'll see in verse 54 that was in his tent. In question 20, what was David holding in his hand when Abner brought him to Saul after the battle? Was it the head of Goliath, Goliath's sword, his sling, or nothing? And that was the head of Goliath, the proof of the mighty deed, in verse 57. So how was your memory of the great story? Do let me know in the comments, and stick around for a reading of the great confrontation. God bless. 1 Samuel chapter 17. Now the Philistines gathered together their armies to battle, and were gathered together at Shochoh, which belongeth to Judah, and pitched between Shochoh and Azekah, in Ephes-dammim. And Saul and the men of Israel were gathered together, and pitched by the valley of Elah, and set the battle in array against the Philistines. And the Philistines stood on a mountain on the one side, and Israel stood on the mountain on the other side, and there was a valley between them. And there went out a champion out of the camp of the Philistines, named Goliath, of Gath, whose height was 6 cubits and a span. And he had a helmet of brass upon his head, and he was armed with a coat of mail, and the weight of the coat was 5,000 shekels of brass. And he had greaves of brass upon his legs, and a target of brass between his shoulders. And the staff of his spear was like a weaver's beam, and his spear's head weighed 600 shekels of iron. And one bearing a shield went before him. And he stood and cried unto the armies of Israel, and said unto them, Why are ye come out to set your battle in array? Am I not a Philistine? And ye servants to Saul, choose you a man for you, and let him come down to me. If he be able to fight with me, and to kill me, then we will be your servants. But if I prevail against him, and kill him, then shall ye be our servants, and serve us. And the Philistines said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man, that we may fight together. When Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. Now David was the son of that Ephrathite of Bethlehem, Judah, whose name was Jesse. And he had 8 sons, and the man went among men for an old man in the days of Saul. And the 3 eldest sons of Jesse went and followed Saul to the battle. And the names of his 3 sons that went to the battle were Eliab the firstborn, and the next unto him Abinadab, and the third Shammah. And David was the youngest, and the 3 eldest followed Saul. But David went and returned from Saul to feed his father's sheep at Bethlehem. And the Philistine drew near morning and evening, and presented himself 40 days. And Jesse said unto David his son, Take now for thy brethren an ephah of this parched corn, and these 10 loaves, and run to the camp of thy brethren. And carry these 10 cheeses unto the captain of their 1,000, and look how thy brethren fare, and take their pledge. Now Saul and they, and all the men of Israel, were in the valley of Elah, fighting with the Philistines. And David rose up early in the morning, and left the sheep with the keeper, and took and went, as Jesse had commanded him. And he came to the trench, as the host was going forth to the fight, and shouted for the battle. For Israel and the Philistines had put the battle in array, army against army. And David left his carriage in the hand of the keeper of the carriage, and ran into the army, and came and saluted his brethren. And as he talked with them, behold, there came up the champion, the Philistine of Gath, Goliath by name, out of the armies of the Philistines, and spake according to the same words. And David heard them. And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were sore afraid. And the men of Israel said, Have ye seen this man that is come up? Surely to defy Israel is he come up. And it shall be that the man who killeth him, the king will enrich him with great riches, and will give him his daughter, and make his father's house free in Israel. And David spake to the men who stood by him, saying, What shall be done to the man that killeth this Philistine, and taketh away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine, that he should defy the armies of the living God? And the people answered him after this manner, saying, So shall it be done to the man that killeth him. And Eliab his eldest brother heard when he spake unto the men. And Eliab's anger was kindled against David, and he said, Why camest thou down hither? And with whom hast thou left those few sheep in the wilderness? I know thy pride, and the naughtiness of thine heart, for thou art come down that thou mightest see the battle. And David said, What have I now done? Is there not a cause? And he turned from him toward another, and spake after the same manner. And the people answered him again after the former manner. And when the words were heard which David spake, they rehearsed them before Saul, and he sent for him, And David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Thy servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Thou art not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him, for thou art but a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." And David said unto Saul, "Thy servant kept his father's sheep, and there came a lion and a bear, and took a lamb out of the flock. And I went out after him, and smote him, and delivered it out of his mouth. And when he arose against me, I caught him by his beard, and smote him, and slew him. Thy servant slew both the lion and the bear. And this uncircumcised Philistine shall be as one of them, seeing he hath defied the armies of the living God." David said, moreover, "The Lord that delivered me out of the paw of the lion, and out of the paw of the bear, he will deliver me out of the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said unto David, "Go, and the Lord be with thee." And Saul armed David with his armour, and he put a helmet of brass upon his head. Also he armed him with a coat of mail. And David girded his sword upon his armour, and he essayed to go, for he had not proved it. And David said unto Saul, "I cannot go with these, for I have not proved them." And David put them off him. And he took his staff in his hand, and chose 5 smooth stones out of the brook, and put them in a shepherd's bag which he had, even in a scrip. And his sling was in his hand, and he drew near to the Philistine. And the Philistine came on, and drew near unto David, and the man that bare the shield went before him. And when the Philistine looked about, and saw David, he disdained him, for he was but a youth, and ruddy, and of fair countenance. And the Philistine said unto David, "Am I a dog, that thou comest to me with staves?" And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. And the Philistine said to David, "Come to me, and I will give thy flesh unto the fowls of the air, and to the beasts of the field." Then said David to the Philistine, "Thou comest to me with a sword, and with a spear, and with a shield. But I come to thee in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom thou hast defied. This day will the Lord deliver thee into mine hand, and I will smite thee, and take thine head from thee. And I will give the carcasses of the host of the Philistines this day unto the fowls of the air, and to the wild beasts of the earth, that all the earth may know that there is a God in Israel. And all this assembly shall know that the Lord saveth not with sword and spear. For the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands." And it came to pass, when the Philistine arose, and came, and drew nigh to meet David, that David hastened, and ran towards the army to meet the Philistine. And David put his hand in his bag, and took thence a stone, and slang it, and smote the Philistine in his forehead, that the stone sunk into his forehead, and he fell upon his face to the earth. So David prevailed over the Philistine with a sling and with a stone, and smote the Philistine, and slew him. But there was no sword in the hand of David. Therefore David ran, and stood upon the Philistine, and took his sword, and drew it out of the sheath thereof, and slew him, and cut off his head therewith. And when the Philistines saw their champion was dead, they fled. And the men of Israel and of Judah arose, and shouted, and pursued the Philistines, until thou come to the valley, and to the gates of Ekron. And the wounded of the Philistines fell down by the way of Shaaraim, even unto Gath, and unto Ekron. And the children of Israel returned from chasing after the Philistines, and they spoiled their tents. And David took the head of the Philistine, and brought it to Jerusalem, but he put his armour in his tent. And when Saul saw David go forth against the Philistine, he said unto Abner, the captain of the host, "Abner, whose son is this youth?" And Abner said, "As thy soul liveth, O king, I cannot tell." And the king said, "Inquire thou whose son the stripling is." And as David returned from the slaughter of the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul with the head of the Philistine in his hand. And Saul said to him, Whose son art thou, thou young man? And David answered, I am the son of thy servant Jesse, the Bethlehemite.